This is IAQ Radio, Indoor Air Quality Radio, the voice of the indoor air quality industry, with your hosts, Radio Joe Hughes and the Z-Man, Cliff Zlotnick. And now, Radio Joe Hughes.
Good day and welcome to IAQ Radio Plus. It's episode 738. This week we welcome Darren Hudema, Joe Morphis, and Ken Siders, Paul Clark, and Tim Fagan, with some boots on the ground reports from the restoration industry's response to Hurricanes Helene and Milton. This week we're going to talk to a diverse panel of restoration responders to responding to the back-to-back hurricanes that affected Florida and several southeastern states this past month. And we've got Pete Consigli joining us, taking Cliff's spot this week. Cliff's going to be away, but he'll be back next week, and Pete's going to take care of the blog and so on. So before we get started, let's thank our sponsors. They're the reason we can continue doing the show. Sponsors are AIHA, the American Industrial Hygiene Association, at AIHA.org. IICRC, the Institute for Inspection, Cleaning, and Restoration Certification, at IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, RIA, at restorationindustry.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA, at EIA-USA.org. Actionable Insights at getinsights.org. IAQ Radio industry sponsors are Particles Plus at particlesplus.com. BioPlanet at byoplanet.com.
And now you can win a cool prize. It's time for the IAQ Radio Trivia question. Be the first to correctly answer. Simply email your answer to czlotnick at cs.com. Or if listening live, just text your answer from your computer. And now, here's the Z-Man.
All right, no Z-Man today. I've got it, though. Congratulations go out to Dawn Weeks, Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, who was the first to identify Dr. J. Portnoy as Kevin Kennedy's former boss at Children's Mercy Hospital and mentor. Today's IAQ Radio trivia question is, name the hurricane having the greatest wind speed ever recorded for a hurricane. All right, so this week we're going to interview a diverse panel of restoration responders. We've got a great group of people here with us. Paul Clark is going to join us. Joe Morphis is with us. Tim Fagan and Darren Hudema, and also Ken Siders with House Check. We'll get you a little more detail on each as we go along. And Pete Consigli, the restoration industry global watchdog. Pete, let me jump on with you first. You're in that area, South Florida. Give us a little bit of your own kind of overview of where we are, and then what you would like to hear from the guys today.
Yeah. Well, Joe, first of all, one quick correction. I see Ken Siders called in. He hasn't been with House Check in a while. He's environmental testing there. So you may have had an old bio on him. So I wanted to clarify that. So, Ken, you can calm down. Probably the hair went up in the back of his neck when he heard that. I sent the text, Paul should be calling in soon. He was at some roofing conference in Orlando, and he was going to try to see if he could find a hot spot to call in. So, keep an eye on that, Grayson. If you see him call in, go ahead and it looks like actually he's on there now. Okay, cool. So listen, I live in kind of the Naples, Bonita Springs area. And for the first hurricane, Helene, we didn't actually have anything happen down here. Most of the damage off of the I-75 corridor where both hurricanes hit, really the storm surge is the big one. So like Marco Island, parts of Naples. I mean, I live inland 6, 7, 8 miles from the Bonita beachfront area. We get just some wind, rain, a little bit of thunder, lightning, the normal stuff that you get all summer long if you live in the state of Florida. So I never vacated. I never even had a flash where the power went off. We had a little bit of on and off winter rain, and I think a lot of that was from the probably from the outer bands. Now, the original trajectory for that for Helene was kind of following where Idalia did the year before, where it was going to hit in the Big Bend, but it actually went a little bit further north, hit Tallahassee, and all up in that area. But most of the coverage, and it seemed the more significant damage was in the Carolinas, parts of Georgia. These guys are going to talk about that, South Georgia, Valdosta area. Of course, those mountains in, I guess that would be Western Carolina. They just weren't really prepared for that kind of damage. And there was damage, I guess, in Tennessee and Virginia and some in South Carolina too. Then on top of that, when the second hurricane came, and that was drilled in, was going to hit Tampa. Tampa hasn't had a major hurricane in 100 years. And actually, in the history of recorded temperature, Tampa's it's never been 100 degrees. I think part of that may have to do with the winds that come off the Gulf, etc. And that they were pretty scared. And there are people who have lived there for years that never vacated. Friends of mine personally who lived in the Tampa area that actually vacated and got out of town. Now, these hurricanes are very unpredictable. And with Milton, it changed at the last minute. It went further south. So it affected Fort Myers in that area more, which those of you to remember, Fort Myers really just got wiped out big time for me 2 years ago. But that changing of its mind has a big impact. And that's what happened in 2017 with Irma. That was my first major hurricane of all the years where I lived in Florida. It was supposed to go up the east coast of Florida and hit Miami and West Palm and Fort Lauderdale. Last minute, it turned and it hit directly in Bonita Springs where I live. That one I wrote out with a friend of mine. I had hurricane shutters. But the lesson that I learned from that, and the reason I vacated for Milton, is even if you're not afraid of significant damage from the wind and the rain, the power is going to be out. And let me tell you, when the power is out, it takes several days to come back, and it's miserable. No internet, etc. So if people have a place to vacate, which fortunately I do, they should go, and they should go earlier than later, because if you wait to the last minute, between the freeways, the stores, the gas lines, it's just brutal. So I did vacate. The power did go out. I came back about 4 or 5 days later when the power came back, and where I particularly live, we had no significant damage, just landscaping stuff, trees, branches, that kind of stuff that needs to be cleaned up. We were fortunate. The beach communities got hit pretty hard, not too far from me, mostly for the storm surge. And then you could see, even though the hurricane came a little further south, so it didn't hit Tampa as hard as that it would have. But I think the cities that probably are most affected, and these guys, when they start weighing in, can comment because they're probably working in those areas, was Sarasota, Venice Beach, Englewood, all those towns south of Tampa along the I-75 corridor. And those are the same ones that were pounded by Ian 2 years ago. And this affects the economy, the snowbird season. A lot of these are Airbnbs, these condos that are on the water. And it takes a while for those things to come back. It take 2 years. And the thing is, these hurricanes, one on top of the other, they haven't even had a chance to clean all the original debris out from the first one. Anyone that was watching our governor on the news before Milton hit, he had them working 24 hours a day, and all the landfills open just to remove all the debris from Helene, so those didn't become flying targets and become very dangerous. Talking about my friend Rusty, there were a lot of guys that working in the Tampa area, which had to be vacated because of the hurricane. And then at the same time, there were people living in the other states that were working there that lived in Tampa that had to come back to protect their own homes. So we have a great panel with Darren Hudema is going to, they're based in Florida. Their corporate offices are in the Fort Lauderdale area. He'll talk about what Puroclean's doing. Josh Miller had a conflict come up, but he got his VP of national sales. Fortunately, was able to call in, and it was on the ground for 10 days following the hurricane. He'll talk about what the Rainbow guys are doing. And my buddy Timmy Fagan, who's celebrating the final year of the national champion Wolverines up there. He'll talk about from the franchise perspective what all of the different people under the Belfor and franchise brand are doing. And I think a big point from all of these guys is you got to be prepared ahead of time. Number one. Number two, you got to have resources and support. If you go wandering down into these areas unprotected, the lone wolf, lone solo, particularly if you're not properly licensed, you come from out of the area to come into an area like a gold digger. People don't like that. and I don't think they liked it anywhere, but particularly in the Southeast and in Louisiana and places like that, they really don't like it. And you're not going to be welcome no matter how hard you want to help. And my friends Paul Clark and Ken Siders, they've been on the ground all over the state, particularly Ken. Ken's been on the shows before, and those of you that know Ken, he gets boots on the ground and goes into these damaged areas. He's going to look at it from an environmental consultant standpoint. And Paul does a lot of training. He started after Ian to collaborate and put together different service providers to help people in the area. And he travels around the state and works. So you're going to have a wide perspective of the show. We have a special 90-minute show. We're going to go to 1:30, and I'll do the best I can to match the Z-Man's blog. We'll have a Watchdog blog this week. And so with that, that's kind of my general overview. I appreciate all the people that have called in live. We got a couple people I see on here I haven't seen in a while, but their names popped up. It's good to have you all call in. And Joe, I'll turn it back to you and let you go round robin with the panel and start some of your questions.
Thank you, Pete. Let's start with Paul Clark. Paul, you're the roofing consultant guy. You do more roofing than I guess restoration. I'm just curious, how difficult has it been for the roofing contractors to get in there and do their thing? I mean, the first thing you got to do is tarp these off, I assume, but talk to our listeners a little bit about what you're seeing on the ground.
Yeah, so when we're coming in doing the roofing, obviously, you got a lot of the restoration guys get in there because of the floods and stuff like that. But then we're getting in there tarping, getting with people to get the trees off the roofs. There's a lot of landscaping damage down here and debris from the storms. You had Helene and then you had Milton, within 2 weeks of each other. So, we're seeing a big mess, but it's getting cleaned up. We're getting a lot of calls for tarping and shrink wrap and those types of things. But the main focus we're seeing right now is either if they got leaks, getting the shrink wrap tarped, or getting the restoration companies in there to mitigate and get them dried out and get the demos going. So you're seeing a lot of people out there. The one thing that I do want to tell people is, I also, do adjusting. So I'm an IA as well as being a consultant and a roofing contractor. And I've been IAing this storm about 30 claims. And one of the big things I'm seeing, I'm in folks' homes and they're still not mitigated. I mean, there's mold all over the place. They don't know what to do. And then you got guys that are just working in the neighborhood, handymen coming in there and saying, oh, we'll demo it. And when the people leave, I'm like, no, that's not the correct way of doing it. So you got to explain the correct way of, it's not just coming in, as the old term would be, is the guys that aren't licensed or don't know what they're doing, trash and bag. You don't want those guys. You got to get the guys that know what they're doing. So I try to advise, the proper way, people to contact. So that's what I'm seeing a lot of as of right now with the storm. And I've been going from Bonita all the way up to Newport Richey, and as far as lower, south of Orlando is where the damage, and went all the way out to Daytona that I'm aware of. But I've been from Orlando, Newport Richey, all the way down to Bonita.
Our engineers in the Tampa area, he said the southern part of Tampa got pretty well destroyed with flooding, and that Pasco County above Tampa also got hit pretty hard. Darren, you're down in the Florida area, I believe. What are you seeing?
Well, we're not where Pete is. We're on the East Coast, just west of Fort Lauderdale. But our response as far as Puroclean franchises has been immense to the West Coast. We've got probably 30 to 40 different franchises that are working all through Florida. And because of how Helene affected Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, and North Carolina, there's a lot of work that's being done up there. And then have Milton come in behind it and affect most of Florida, but essentially created, and compounded the issues that were already that occurred with Helene. So basically, it's requiring a collaborated effort as far as the response is concerned. You saw the size of some of the damage that's been done to commercial properties, even the two major sports stadiums where the Tampa Bay Rays play, and as well as the Buccaneers. Those two facilities were significantly impacted. There's calls going out for bids to, potentially, rebuild or dry down or remediate accordingly. So it's been a pretty significant, and it's been a while since there's been back-to-back events, let alone within 2 weeks of each other. So, they're just getting started with, the cleanup and restoration from Helene, and then 2 weeks later, they're pulling out all their equipment. We had a number of franchises that moved out of the area, brought their equipment and trailers and whatnot back to our corporate facilities until Milton passed over. So there's been a lot of challenges related to the logistics and responding to these types of events, which taxes a lot of resources from employees to equipment to man hours. The amount of man hours these guys are spending and not having to do it once but now twice, and which has led to a lot of other issues related to insurability, being underinsured or not insured, period, and a lot of claims. Like one carrier, just with one event, denied 77% of the claims because of the type of flood damage that's occurred. Most of us know that, when you're dealing with these types of floods, and it comes over threshold, most of it's not covered by your regular insurance policy. And now you're going through FEMA as far as restitution is concerned. So it creates a lot of challenges in how you're getting paid and having to deal with all those logistics.
Darren, I'm just curious, do you have any, I'm sure you probably have people up in like that Western North Carolina area, and have you heard, what we see on the news is that they got wiped out. It's devastated. Can you give us any info on what's going on there?
Well, to begin any restoration efforts, to start with, you got to be able to get access into the town. And when you look at Asheville as a whole, you're pretty much one way in and one way out. That's, your I-40 that pretty much, I think, goes through that area, and it washed out both in and out. And so it took some weeks to be able to get resources into those areas, which we all know the longer water sits and, that type of damage that occurs, it's just going to exacerbate the problems when it comes to the buildings. So there is response that's, being done up there. I saw a recent report that the Biltmore is getting, ready to reopen. But they've got the ability, and resources to be able to get the things that are necessary in there as far as contractors. But a lot of, response in that regard, now becomes airborne, where you're trying to fly in the various types of things, people, manpower, your equipments, whatever is necessary. But it's going to take a while they're looking at 2-3 years of rebuilding because of the amount of damage that was done to Asheville. And that's the problem when you get into the mountainous regions. You get all that water comes down and it's only got one way to go. And eventually when it just, accumulates like it does, it just takes out buildings, the mud flows. You're in most cases, you're rebuilding those structures because of the amount of damage that's been done.
And that I'm also assuming, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine most of those people do not have flood insurance. They just never expected this.
It's not that they don't have insurance, but for those particular areas, they don't typically get hit with that, what they would call a floodplain area. That's not the kind of water they get. Where down here in Florida, you are dealing with flood insurance, which is, provided through FEMA for all intents and purpose. They don't necessarily have those types of resources available to them because they have their typical house insurance. So, depends on, what hit first. Did the hurricane or did the storm take off the roof and create the water damage to begin with? Or if you're dealing with rising waters over threshold, and mountains that give away to mudslides, essentially those types of losses aren't insurable. and leaves them in a tough situation as to how they're going to rebuild. In some cases, they just don't. You know, in some of these types of situations, when you're dealing with these types of hurricanes and things that interrupt businesses, over 50% of them don't reopen because of lack of insurance or the ability to have the financial wherewithal to do it. So restaurants and things like that, they just don't have the financial resources to rebuild, and as a result, they never reopen.
All right, let's go over to Tim Fagan with the Belfor franchise group. Tim, give us your overview of what you're seeing on the ground.
Well, I agree with Darren with what he just spoke about. If I were to kind of summarize, particularly the Florida events with Helene and Milton, I'd put it in 3 words: mobilize, demobilize, remobilize. And, you know, it was because, you know, our people were mobilized to the event zone. They began work. You know, here comes Milton. Get the heck out of there, guys. You know, your health and safety is worth a lot more than trying to stay and do another job. And then as Milton passed, remobilizing. But same things that Darren was talking about, the difficulty in insurance coverages, a lot less TPA work or numbers than even the TPAs thought that they were going to hit as far as covered claims. A lot of stuff with groundwater or water that came over the threshold in that area. So you know, I run 3 different brands for Belfor Franchise Group, and they all had different issues. Like, I think I took a note down because I talked to my COO of 800 Board Up. They took for the 2 days before Milton hit, they took 742 calls just for board ups, just to do board ups.
Wow.
Well,
what's an average day without this?
Oh, well, this was just in the event zone, just there, just in the Tampa market area. So go from, I don't know, you know, maybe Clearwater, maybe down to Fort Myers, that general area, because they really didn't know where it was coming in, where it was. But remember, it was a Cat 5 when it was out at sea, and it slowed down. But those were, I mean, and so you're demobilizing, yet at the same time, you're taking these calls and telling people to stay and see if they can do one more board up, you know, for these calls. So yeah, I mean, they were challenging. It, you know, there's capacity constraints everywhere in a CAT event. And you know, that was one of the things that I thought was odd. And we know in this business that the important thing is the relationship before the need. And those who have no relationships before there's a need, when there's capacity constraints, those are the people that find themselves kind of at the end of the list. So we were constantly prioritizing to get these boards up before the hurricane hit. You know, I run Blue Kangaroo Packoutz, and for the people that deployed down there, we had a lot of commercial opportunities, and we're on a lot of commercial opportunities, condo buildings and invites from property management companies. Not a ton of residential that we're doing. A lot of times they took their things that were on the main floor and either total lost them or moved them to the upstairs or something like that. But we're not on a ton of residential losses. We're on some, you know, several dozen, but not what you would think, not like hundreds like you would think. And my 800 water damage guys that deployed down there, they responded to about 600 claims, but we thought that there would be many more than that. And most of them were residential, small commercial. Belfor typically takes the bigger commercial opportunities. There was a community center that got hit that some of our guys were on. A lot of free market claims where people would go, water damage and 800 water would pick up, but those typically have to be screened before we deploy anybody on those. And of course, every company has kind of a VIP list. So there's VIPs that call Belfor general managers or other people that they know, and they want to check on their mom who's down there, who rode out the storm and that kind of stuff. So we went on and also mitigated, literally dozens of those kind of, we call them VIP claims. So that was our take. In Western Carolina, we're on some big commercial losses, not much like Darren talked about. I mean, there wasn't a lot of residential stuff because we haven't seen a ton of residential, at least on my brands down there in Asheville area.
Are you having trouble getting plywood, things, materials?
I haven't heard that.
Good.
In the 800 board up, we have both Belfor at 1-800 board up offices and local service provider, independent general contractors at 800 board up, and I have not heard that. You always have constraints on equipment and supplies in event zones, but there was enough forewarning that the places in and around the event zone seemed to be pretty well stocked. So I had not heard from our people that, hey, we had to bring in stuff from Georgia or Alabama to help, which we've done that in the past, but I don't think we had to do that at this.
Let's go over to Joe Morphis, the Vice President of National Sales for Rainbow Restoration. Joe, welcome to the show. First time we've got a chance to meet. If you can unmute yourself there and give us your overview of what you're seeing.
Yeah, so I had a much different experience than what has been talked about today. I started in the Siesta Key area in Florida, and we worked our way up through Georgia and then into the Western North Carolina, Waynesville, Canton, Clyde area through North Carolina. And it's still a humanitarian effort. And what we experienced was just the opposite of what we've talked about today. There are material shortages. People are living in tents. As a former State Farm executive, which is the world that I came from, I stopped at every State Farm office along the way, and they basically told me the same story. We're stopping our insurance practices to make a humanitarian effort. Coat drives, tent drives. We experienced people north of the Waynesville area in North Carolina that were literally living in tents and had nothing. They had no food, no water. Restoration was the furthest thing from their minds. And so when we go to this area and I hear these efforts, and I'm totally in agreement, I'm a restoration executive myself. What's first? Is it humanitarian or is it profits? And Rainbow is a little bit different company. So we're smaller than most of the guys here on this panel. And so we really take that personal differentiation to something that we drill down on. So our team that was on the ground just literally stopped and started helping people. Not to say that other companies did not, but we prioritized the humanitarian effort before the restoration effort. And from that, we've experienced a ton of residential claims, tons and tons of people that have reached out to me and our team from last week and said, hey, man, appreciate you just coming and putting your arms around me. I appreciate you guys being here and talking to us. You didn't try to sell us anything. You didn't try to fix the high rise. You just tried to make my life a little bit better. We stopped at a rest stop about 10 miles south of Asheville, where there was a great effort from the government to provide housing, potable water, showers, things of that nature to the rescue people going into the areas. And so you don't think about that, right? The people that are trying to help people, the food, those people get tired. They're hungry. They want to shower. They want to lay down somewhere. They want to have fresh water. So we supported that. We stopped there. We helped those guys. And not to say nobody else did, but a little bit different spin on it. And we walked away from there with a real different strategy, I think, as a restoration company on how to respond to natural disasters, particularly on a holistic level, because we're not big enough to go in, right, and just service every area. So we started in Siesta Key. We actually stayed in Claremont outside of Orlando. And then we drove 2 hours down Highway 4 to Siesta Key, worked our way back up to Tampa, left there after a couple of days, got on a plane, went up to Charlotte, drove over to the, again, through Clyde, Canton, over to Asheville, and then to Waynesville. And we saw the same storm creating havoc everywhere, like from Athens, Georgia, up to Waynesville, North Carolina. It's too much for any restorer to try to address, in one spot. So we made the strategic decision to try to, how do we support our people? How do we support the people on the ground with the stuff that matters? Because after this event's over with, guys, just saying, they'll remember the logo, they'll remember the response, but they'll also remember that guy that just didn't try to do anything but wrap their arms around them and say, hey man, how do I help you? And that's what we did. We didn't make a big impact, Joe. I'm just going to tell you, we don't have a lot of money coming in from that, but we've got people that I gave a code out to and gave a meal to that will remember Rainbow from now on.
What was your experience with respect to the government response? There's been varying reports. FEMA's been great.
Yep.
FEMA's been in the way. What was your experience?
FEMA was not in the way. NFIP is a big problem for us. And as a former State Farm executive, I can tell you that rain tree that comes down from a guy in, wherever, Athens, Georgia, that has a flood, he's got to go through hoops and ladders to get to some kind of resolution. So the government wasn't in our way. They were just very inquisitive on how do we qualify the people that have a claim. And we were able to help with that. Like, okay, rising water. I'll give you an example. There in Clyde, North Carolina, if any of you guys have ever been through Clyde, it's one street, right? And on the right-hand side of the highway, there's a railroad track. And nobody will ever tell you that water has ever come up past a railroad track. So there's another 20 feet up to the highway, and there's another 20 feet up to the buildings. It surpassed the buildings on the left-hand side. This was a once in 100-year flood.
Wow.
So NFIP came in and said, oh, everything east of the railroad track is going to be covered. Everything west, we'll have to determine that. But they were not.
IP, did you say? What is that?
National Flood Insurance Program,
Okay.
NFIP.
Thank you. I got you.
They were not opposed to us. They just needed evidence of why the rising water was a damage or loss versus was it a wind-driven rain that knocked the roof off of somewhere and the water came down into the house. So it was just a matter of education and explanation. And so the insurance agents, both independents and big brand, needed our help in just, articulating that story. What happened here? That house on the east side of the railroad tracks got inundated with water because of why? Was it rising water from the creek or a river? Or was it that the hurricane knocked the roof off and then the water poured down in the house? Everybody on this call knows what that looks like. So that was our biggest question. They weren't in our way. They just needed education.
Gotcha.
Hey, Joe.
Yes, Pete.
Let me jump in for 1 minute here before you move.
I want to get
on.
Ken Siders in too. I don't know if he's still.
I understand that, but
Okay.
I got a follow up. I want to ask Joseph on this before you moved on to Ken. So Joseph, you made a comment that you stopped at every one of these State Farm offices in your travels, going from one area to the other, and they moved away from claims to more humanitarian. What do you mean by that? And where were they coming from?
So it wasn't just the State Farm offices. It was the independents. It was everybody. In the North Carolina corridor, once we got to Clyde, or really from Canton on to the Northwest, claims didn't matter. People were walking into these insurance offices saying, I need coats. I don't have anything. And no disrespect to anybody on this call. These people, they didn't have a lot to begin with, right? They didn't have the brick houses and storm shelters and what have you. So they were walking into the insurance offices asking for help. Like, what do I do? So those people, the insurance agents and their communities, stopped the claims. When I say stop, they prioritized the humanitarian effort. They were like, let's do a coat drive. Let us get some food. Let us see what shelter you can go to. Let us get something to help you today, because insurance is not going to help you. And these people didn't know where else to go. They're like, this is the center of help for me. So that's what I was talking about when I said they stopped and started helping people.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Back to you, Joe.
Sure.
All right, do we have Ken Siders on the call? Ken? Maybe not.
Yeah, no, Ken was on there. I saw that he was I think was muted.
Tell you what we'll do. Let's go to halftime, Grayson, and we'll try and roust up Ken Siders and get him in and get his perspective on what he's seeing after these two major hurricanes. We'll be right back with the second half of the show. Our association sponsors are AIHA, Healthy Workplaces, A Healthier World, AIHA.org. The Environmental Information Association, EIA's multidisciplinary membership collects, generates, and disseminates information concerning environmental and occupational health hazards in the built environment at EIA-USA.org. The IICRC, a nonprofit standards development and certifying body for the cleaning and restoration industry, IICRC.org. The Restoration Industry Association, the oldest and largest nonprofit professional trade association dedicated to providing leadership and promoting best practices through advocacy, standards, and professional qualifications for the restoration industry at restorationindustry.org. Actionable insights, no more mistakes, no more missed line items in your Xactimate estimates at getinsights.org. Industry sponsors are Particles Plus, feature-rich particle counters and air quality instrumentation. Count on us, particlesplus.com. BioPlanet at byoplanet.com, improving human, animal, and environmental health with electrostatic spray technology and advanced chemistries at byoplanet.com. All right, we're back. I don't see Ken.
Hey, Joe.
Yes,
Joe,
sir.
so Ken texted me. He said that he was in an area with a bad signal. He lost his signal. So what I told him was try to get into a spot in Grayson. If you see Ken come on and he pops back up, let's just put him on right away while he has his signal, even if someone else is talking, because he's truly in the field, boots on the ground, and these are the issues. It ain't easy to pick up a signal in some of these spots. So Grayson, keep an eye out for Ken. He was on there with his associate Alan Blakely. They were on there for a good part of the call, and then they must have dropped off. So he just texted me and I texted him back. Okay, Joe, go ahead.
All right, I've got a text here that I want to read. Basic restoration and mold prevention offered by restoration contractors is critical. Mold testing is not conclusive and not needed in these situations. Mold consultants and testing labs have pushed their services following past hurricane, make lots of money, but generally not helping, often interfering with desperately needed restoration. Anybody want to comment on that comment from one of our industrial hygiene audience members? Darren, I see you smiling.
It's a really good comment because, essentially when you go into something like this, what the restoration is going to involve. There's going to be a lot of cleanup. You're tearing out a lot of materials because of the type of, water that's impacted the building. But we all know too that the longer that the water sits there before the dry down can begin, the greater chances you're going to have for microbial issues. And so once you actually see it growing, you don't have a problem. There's no reason to have to test it. So until, the remediation has been completed, if a building is restorable, whether you take it down to the studs and you go through all the proper cleaning according to the IICRC standards, then, essentially you're not going to necessarily have to have somebody come in and tell you got mold. But what would be recommended is to ensure that the work is being done. And listen, there's a lot of challenges going on right now with unlicensed contractors that are going in and doing work that don't have any clue of what it is that they're doing, charging hundreds of thousands of dollars to do work, as far as tear outs and rebuilds, or et cetera. But the building is not necessarily tested after the fact to verify that it has been properly cleaned. And that, if there is a time that I would recommend that they potentially do testing, it's before you get to the rebuild stage to make sure that the building has been properly remediated. That's a good time, because essentially now you're going to know whether or not that building has been properly restored, using the IICRC standards based on the S500, the S520 when it comes to mold remediation and cleanup, to ensure that the client gets what they're looking for. And to an earlier point, when we talk about humanitarian needs and things to that extent, people don't care what you know until you show how much you care. And the challenge that people are getting down there right now is they're simply wanting to get back into their homes as quickly as possible, and they're taking whatever contractor that potentially gives them that opportunity, not necessarily qualifying that they are a licensed contractor, which you need to be in the state of Florida, and two, that they actually have a mold remediation license for the state of Florida. So, that's where we caution a lot of building owners that this is something that they need to make sure they do their due diligence in when they're hiring a contractor. Make sure they're licensed, make sure they're properly certified, and make sure they're following industry standards, and that they're doing it in accordance with the law as far as Florida is concerned.
Hey,
Tim,
Joe,
go ahead, Pete.
why don't you let's follow up on this question that our regular call-in IH kind of rattled the waters. I think it'd be good to hear from Tim and also to hear from Joseph. And if Paul wants to weigh in, what do you guys think as far as the testing, the mold testing? What are you saying? Is there a policy that you all have for your own companies that you recommend? I think that's a good question to kind of go around the panel on that.
I agree. I think another thing I want to clarify is that, and Darren brought this up, it's not just going in and testing. It's just getting that third party eyes on to make sure that the work was done properly. And I think that's an important service that people can provide. But when they start immediately talking about we're going to take tests, that's when I start to think maybe I need to talk to somebody else. But I don't know. Tim, let's see what you're.
Joe, so look, the note that I took on what Darren said, I'd like to get consensus on the panel, is he said where he could see that testing could add value to the customer is after the demo and the drying and all that's been done before they go to the rebuild, which in essence is kind of like a post remediation verification, which is in our standards. That makes sense to me. And it gives a certain level of assurance before they do the rebuild, whether it's the same company doing the rebuild or whether it's another general contractor. At least, there's a clear line of delineation from the emergency, the demo, the drying, and then when you try to put it back together. So who do you want to call on next there, Joe?
Tim, what do you think?
Go ahead.
Tim? What do you do on the what's your policy on third party testing on these projects?
Well, we highly recommend it. On these CAD events, unless we have a hometown franchise there who does the rebuild and is licensed for the rebuild, etc. When we're done with the mitigation, we highly recommend the homeowner get third party testing before they start putting things back together. But that said, when we come in from out of town, we don't sit around for days waiting for a test to be done. That's really, we're there to do the mitigation and gone. And to Joe's side about the humanitarian and the service side, it made me think about one of the jobs that we're on down in Nashville, where this plant makes between 60 and 70% of all the saline solution bags in the country used in hospitals, in medical centers. 70%. They were flying helicopters in to take the product out of the plant, so to get to hospitals where they had people that were waiting for saline bag. They were waiting for their surgeries. I have two kids up here in Michigan. I have a son who's a doctor and a daughter who's a nurse, and both of them mentioned to me the shortage of saline bags and how hard it is to get them, knowing that we're on a project down there right now where we're working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, mobile command centers there, et cetera, in order to get these saline bags out so people can have their surgeries and their medical procedures done. So, I mean, there are, and I agree with Joe, that there are humanitarian issues, and sometimes it's they need a coat, and sometimes they need to fill this helicopter up because they got a hospital 150 miles away that can't treat their patients. So those are, I mean, these are real life things that occur to us in this very important job that all of us as restorers do, both the individual and also the corporate side.
That's an excellent point, Tim. Thanks for bringing it. I remember seeing articles about the fact that elective surgeries had to be canceled essentially because of that particular issue. So I think it's an important one to bring up. Joe, I see you shaking your head there. I wonder if you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I didn't. It surely did not intend to make light of the efforts that any other restorer that was going in there. Everybody from Belfor to Puroclean to ServPro, everyone was putting their arms around people, right? That was the first priority for all of us, is to make sure that we responded to the people effort first, and then the restoration piece as our business. So when you look at this, and again, I'll go back to the rest stop that we stopped at. There were 18 wheelers, probably 30 of them with potable water. And they told the story that we can't get up into the, if y'all guys will, hills and hollers. I'm from South Texas, so y'all understand what I'm saying right there, hills and hollers. They couldn't get up into all the areas where people needed water. That's the basic fundamental thing that people needed. And so our company, as everybody on this call did, we looked and analyzed the market and said, hey, how do we go in and do, the SMEs, the small to medium enterprise work that the big guys didn't want to get to? And how do we help people on the ground, residential, insurance agents, what have you? So I totally agree with Tim that the first thing that all of us look at is how do we help people? And then from there, how do we do the property restoration? And so that spirit and that initiative has really made a difference. In North Carolina, we didn't hear any complaints. There were no people saying, hey, we don't want your help. We love Puroclean. We love ServPro. We love Belfor. We love Rainbow. Everybody wanted help. And that was a great feeling for us. So that's why I was shaking my head like, yeah, I agree with Tim.
Paul, let me bring you back in here. You started Storm Consultants 2 years ago. I don't know if your timing was just impeccable or if that was something you'd been working on for many years. What are your thoughts on this whole third-party testing versus, you've been in and out of the insurance world too, as I understand it.
Yeah, I've been doing this 26 years as either an adjuster or a contractor. So yeah, testing is, I'm a big advocate of testing because I've seen many times as a roofer general contractor where somebody had, their home remediated, NOAA tested, and 6 months, a year later, they're sick, and all of a sudden they do a test and there's all kinds of mold inside the home. So I'm a huge advocate. Right now I'm boots on the ground doing contracting, plus I'm doing IA work as an insurance adjuster. And like I said, you're getting guys coming into these people's homes and saying, oh yeah, I can demo the work. Well, are you going to clean it? Are you going to have someone come and test? I just had a customer the other day that I was IAing down in Madeira Beach, and I've seen everybody's 18-wheelers on this call in Madeira Beach, Florida. So, I'm proud to see that, and everyone's down there helping. But you've got these handyman guys going down there doing that trash and bag, and they don't know anything about testing. They're getting their own people sick. So why I started Storm Consultants is I wanted to educate. Me and Pete have been talking about bringing, the roofing restoration industry together, because it's not together, and we need one another. You guys need to come in and either do shrink wrap or tarp to dry the building in, so you guys can do what you need to do. And that's why having reputable companies and experts and having a network of experts helps greatly. The end user, the property owner. And lastly, why I do the education is I do a lot of events, and I invite other contractors. And some other people ask me, well, why would you want another roofer in there? Because I want to educate him. I want him to do the proper thing. So when he's going to talk to people, he's doing the proper thing. We have so many people out there doing the wrong thing because they want to make money. And I always say this: if you go and help and serve first, the money will come.
Yeah. If I can add,
Go ahead.
if I can add to that, Joe, because one of the things that's important when you consider how the work is performed, a lot of demo work's going to get done, a lot of cleaning has to be done. But if you got contractors that are going in there and they're not going through what's necessary to prevent mold from occurring again, and that's one of the challenges that you're seeing with unlicensed or fly-by-night contractors that are coming in, is they're getting these buildings, they're saying they get them clean, they start the rebuild process, and I actually got an email from one of our franchises down that area right now that a contractor came in, charged over $160,000 worth of demo and rebuild work, and they've got mold growing again in the building. Well, why is that going to occur? One, it wasn't properly remediated in the first place. Two, it probably wasn't dried down properly. And the third one is that if you don't have climate control, especially here in Florida where you got high humidity, and you've got things that are still flying around in the air, that building's being exposed to the outside elements, you're going to have growth again as well. So one of the reasons why I recommend, and to go back to what Tim mentioned, third party. This is not somebody that, and third party assessors that are going to be able to come in to be able to test in proper IHs is what I'm referring to, because you're going to have some individuals that say, well, they can test for mold or whatever, but they don't necessarily have the ability to provide one recommendation or to, what the remediation practices should be, or to ensure what was done correctly to begin with, and they got a safe building that they can rebuild at that point. But you mentioned, Tim, also that the homeowner ends up doing this, because if your contractor's doing it, to be able to provide a piece of paper and say, see, we've done our job, that's a conflict of interest. Mm-hmm. And there's also those problems that are going on where you got contractors that have mold assessors in their back pocket to write a clean bill of health and essentially have problems with afterwards. And that's a big problem that happened in Tennessee after 2010 floods, is that they had contractors going through and homeowners were asking for spray and pray. So they're applying antimicrobials and biocides, not going through the proper cleaning processes, not going through the proper remediation processes and dry downs. And now the Department of Agriculture, they implemented a license that you need to have for the application of biocides. Why? Because the industry screwed it up, and basically they were told, well, this is all we want to have done. Well, we all know cleaning is essential, then the application of a biocide accordingly, then your proper remediation and cleaning it has to be done to prevent. So it's a big challenge down there, and a lot of contractors that are not in the restoration business don't know what the protocols necessarily are for proper mold remediation. And that's the only reason why, when it comes to homeowners due diligence or consumer protection, is one way, is having somebody that is licensed as an industrial hygienist to be able to come in and be able to do the proper testing accordingly before they start the rebuilds.
Hey, Joe.
Yes, sir.
So a couple of points here. I think the biggest issue, I don't know whether Darren said it or actually Paul may have mentioned this, that you find these buildings that have been remediated, they've been put back together, and then 6 months later, whatever, they have mold problems. Most of the time, you could trace that back because they weren't dried properly. And after the Katrina year, Cliff, myself, and a handful of other REA members, we were involved with FEMA. This was kind of actually through their big engineering firms. You don't work directly with FEMA, you work with their engineering contractors. But we were able to get put into the FEMA guidelines the importance and the necessity that before these buildings are put back together, somebody needs to use a moisture meter to test the moisture in the materials. And that was actually in the FEMA guidelines. We felt that was a big coup for the industry. You know, FEMA kicked back because they thought these meters, you know, were professional meters and they were so expensive. And we said, look, you can get these cheap meters for $20 that will at least have a beeping or a light at whatever the moisture content will be, just a normal timber. They don't have to have sophisticated meters that cost $100 and to have all those skills. They just need to know that they've been to a certain baseline. And that's going to change, obviously, depending on the time of season, what part of the country you're in. So that is in the FEMA, was included in there. I haven't checked it in a while, but the fact that the government makes those recommendations that the materials, at least the studs, the wood, it needs to be dry, because if it's wet and it looks, you know, dry to the touch, etc. They put these buildings back together, they're going to eventually have some high moisture levels, and they're going to get mold, which will come back into the building. So these issues have been around for a long time, and you know, I think it's the moisture testing, not so much the mold testing, but someone goes in and makes sure that the buildings are dry.
Yep.
If they're dry and it's properly put back together, and the conditions are, you know, back to normal, so to speak, you're not going to get mold unless there's a new source. So anyway, I think it's important to reinforce that. I don't know if anybody on the panel has a different view or an objection. I'd certainly give them an opportunity to comment, but to me, that seems what the issue is.
Let me tie that into a comment from the text here, that there is no licensing requirement for mold assessment and remediation in North Carolina. General contractors license is not required for projects costing less than $40,000. So I'm wondering if anybody wants to comment on the differences they see from a state like Florida that does have regulation in this area, and a state versus a state like North Carolina that does not have regulation. It sounds like some of you feel like the regulation is helping, but I don't want to speak for you. Anybody want to address that?
I think when you consider the comments, and in large part what we've been talking about is primarily been Florida, because it's the greatest area that's been hit, aside from, you know, what did go up through Georgia and North Carolina. It's always up to the homeowner to ensure that if they're looking for somebody, you know, to do the work, that they're competent. And there are certain states that do not require a general contractor's license up to a certain dollar amount. You know, so at the end of the day, when you start looking at regulations that are being implemented by the various states, they're doing so to help with consumer protection. The consumer's responsibility is to ensure that who they're bringing in, they want to make sure that they are certified when it comes to the restoration efforts that they're doing, following the industry standards. And it's not just industry standards that we talk about. We also look at OSHA regulations. You know, health and safety is a first prime directive of any contractor as far as their workers, but we also take into consideration, you know, the building owners and occupants accordingly as well. But the thing about it is that any contractor that's doing work that meets certain requirements for their particular state, then they should be licensed to do the work in that state accordingly. That's the responsibility of the contractor, and the due diligence of the consumer is to find out that they're hiring said individuals, if that's required. If it's not required in North Carolina or it's not required in Georgia, then you want to make sure that you're bringing somebody in, especially when we're talking about the drying down of buildings and the remediation for mold or any other services, that if there are, for example, Georgia does have a regulation that you need to be IICRC certified in trauma and crime scene cleanup. So they've recognized the S540 as one of those documents, and training as far as the classes are concerned. So that is a regulation that they've established for Georgia. So there's a number of states that have various regulations. The responsibility of the contractor is to make sure that they meet those requirements accordingly, if they need to be a general contractor's license holder or not. And then making sure that whatever the dollar amount is to stay under that threshold is being met accordingly, or if they exceed it. Now, the work that we're seeing is probably going to exceed the $40,000 mark that somebody mentioned in an earlier comment. So those are the things that, essentially are important. We're not negating, that, all states are going to have the same and equal requirements or not, but they do have their own regulations accordingly. And I think when it comes to, mold remediation and testing, it's one basis that we use to help at least see that we've gotten to an acceptable level. Can you eliminate mold altogether? No. But you want to make sure you've got the proper things that have been done as far as mold remediation completed. And as Pete said, make sure the building is properly dried.
Yeah,
because that's the biggest and most important factor when it comes to prevention, is making sure the building is dried in a timely manner. Well, we know it's all hit these buildings as far as the water is concerned. So we're dealing with category 3. And if the water sits for a period of time, we know that microbial growth is going to be a factor, because trying to get access into some of these communities, I mean, you've seen the hundreds of thousands of pounds of sand or cubic yards of sand that have been moved out of areas just to be able to get access to some of these buildings,
right,
because it's all been reclaimed.
Yep.
So there's a lot of ongoing factors that you can't just necessarily pigeonhole our comments to one factor or another, but to look at this as a holistic approach on how we provide for the consumers appropriately.
Yep. Joe, I would
Joseph.
say I agree with Darren wholeheartedly. And when we were down in Siesta Key last week, there was this, and I remember this specifically, there was this 7 or 6 rows of condos. And in between like 3 of them was this little, it would remind everybody of a drive-in theater. These little concrete barrier 10 by 10 spaces on a 45-degree angle to the beach. And so people would go in and they put little kitchenettes and they put their stuff in them. And those, if on a regular day, those tops of buildings would be about 8 or 9 feet tall. There was literally 16 inches of space between the sand and the roof. Darren, you know what I'm talking about. You saw those too. So you can't even imagine how we start to address the fiduciary responsibility of all of us as restorers in making sure that those people are taken back to their pre-loss state. It's just amazing and overwhelming even as a restorer to try to get to that point. From what Darren was saying, and I again 1000% agree. When do we stop that point of, okay, we know what should be done. The biohazard should be sprayed. The chemicals should be put in. And then the next guy over says, oh no, let's just send in the maintenance guy with towels. Let's just dry it up and get the sand out. So when do we step in and say, oh, you know what, Mr. Maintenance guy, you're wrong?
Let me get Tim.
Just a thought.
Tim back in here for a moment. I thought you might have wanted to add something, Tim.
I've been listening. Well, but about the maintenance guy, or when do you intervene to talk about standard of care in the industry? Is that the question?
Well, no, I just wondered if you saw differences from one state to the other based on them having some type of regulation.
Well, yeah, having franchises in literally every state, they're all different, and they're not just, we're talking just about mold certification, but there's construction license certifications in every state. There's contents licenses in certain states where you have to have a mover license in order to be able to perform restoration contents.
That's interesting.
In certain areas.
I didn't know that.
There's dumpster licenses, for the people that are moving trash. And some states are like, there's certain states, there's a couple states that are one They're one license. There's one company that handles all residential commercial dumpsters in the entire state. And if you try to bring a dumpster into that state that's not that brand, you're breaking the law. They could lock up your dumpster, you know, like they would tie up your car or whatever, and haul it off to an impound lot. So, I mean, my only point is that there are, you know, we think about you know, free market and go get your stuff. Well, if you want to compete in the free market economy, you better follow the rules and know what those rules are before you jump in with both feet. And so that's my only point. A franchisor certainly knows that, and we help the franchisee to understand that before they dive in and pay their money to join the network.
Hey, Joe.
Paul, go ahead. I just want to ask Paul a quick question before we go, but go ahead.
All right, well, go ahead. Ask Paul, then I'll go ahead.
Going back to this different regulations in different states, I want to talk a little about your specialty, which is roofing. North Carolina got wiped out. Atlanta, Georgia area, all that, you know, they got hit. As far as I know, they don't have real stringent code as far as how roofs are put on. Florida, on the other hand, does have pretty stringent codes. And if I'm wrong, you let me know. Do you see that helping, those more stringent codes helping in situations like this? Or do you think it may or may not be helping that much?
Well, I think it helps. You know, it keeps a lot of the riffraff out. We still get them. But having those codes, if you look over the years, I've been in Florida since 2004. And I've traveled other states and over the United States. But as the codes, after every hurricane, the codes get a little more stricter. And if you look at Hurricane Milton compared to Hurricane Ian, there's a lot less roof damage in this storm than there was before. And that's due to the codes, and that's a good thing. So
now, the codes specific to Florida or codes in general?
The code specific to Florida.
Okay.
I think more states and cities should have stricter codes. You know, I got into this business way back in the 90s when I was chasing hailstorms, and you'd go to some cities and you didn't even have to pull a permit, nothing. Just go do a roof.
Right.
So that's, you know, the old saying is after Katrina, I happened to go to Katrina. My best friend was an adjuster. Two of my best friends were adjusters, and I went to go see if I was going to deploy there. And I ended up going back to Florida because Wilma had hit. So we ended up staying in Florida. But where I'm going with this, on the side of the road in Mississippi after Katrina hit, there's two guys in a truck with a piece of plywood, says, we'll do your roof, thus two guys for $110 a square.
Wow.
And people ask me this question all the time. They're like, well, how can they do that? I said, well, these two guys want to make $1,000 for the week, and there's two guys in a truck. There's no insurance. There's no workers' comp, no general liability. They're not paying taxes on that money. And that's because they didn't have, at that time, they didn't have to go get permits and all that stuff. And that could have changed by now. But you see that in every storm. And after every storm, even if there is stringent codes and licensing requirements, you still get the guys coming. You know, the one that I laugh at the most is after Ian, I went and served at a church. And the lady at the church goes, yeah, we had some guys from Arkansas come here and said they have a license in Arkansas, so they can work in Florida. No, they can't. So, you know, that's where the education stuff comes in and trying to talk to people. But yeah, I'm all for it. Having being licensed in the state or city and the codes being stringent.
I want to get into the codes on just building in general, but first, Pete, I know you wanted to head somewhere. Let me see what.
Yeah. So, Joe, I think the bottom line on all this, besides the licensing for mold, which varies from state to state, a lot of states don't have any licensing in that, but there are some states that have very loose general contracting laws, and there are other states that have tough ones, like Florida, California. A lot of the western states are very tough ones. Texas, there are other states they're loose. Okay. Louisiana, they operate under the Napoleonic system. So the use of the word contract authorization, these things, they have different meaning. I think the most important thing, and this is in the code ethics and conduct, most of our certifications, whether it's IICRC, RAA, others, says be in compliance with the local laws, the local jurisdictions. So like Timmy Fagan said, you got to know what the rules and regulations are in the areas where you're doing business. And if you work in multiple states, you can't make assumptions. In Florida in particular, after Hurricane Michael, there were people on the news in orange jumpsuits. And the state did that to make a point. That also happened after Ian. Now, I understand that there was this year after the back-to-back ones, some of the licensing laws were temporarily suspended to allow people to come in. I still haven't got verification on that. I don't know if any of you guys can comment, the panel can comment on that. And if it was, how long it would be before it's back to normal. But, you know, Darren and I think Joseph, they pointed out something very important. At the end of the day, it's still all about buyer beware. The person who's hiring someone, they need to just do their due diligence and have common sense, regardless of what the industry standards are. All this other stuff, it's still a consumer-driven economy, and people should know what they're getting themselves into. They're going to have somebody come into their home, and they're going to be reliable and stand behind the work. That lends back to my opening comments. If you belong to a network, if you have some credibility, you can make certain assurances that these stand by the road guys that Paul just brought up, and there's guys like that after every storm, every event. If somebody want to hire people like that, they do it at their own risk. And, you know, that's just kind of part of what's going on. Also, we'll say that somebody brought up about, maybe it was Joseph, about North Carolina, and now the laws that are that there's some regulation dealing with the application of biocides and mildew treatments. That's existed for years. The Z-Man's talked about that for years at multiple events in the industry. There's at least 15 states. Oklahoma, I know, is one for sure, but there are other Midwestern states that have licensing. If you apply a product that is the intent is to kill or treat mold, it requires similar to a pesticide license. So sometimes it's loosely enforced, like in California and other states, but still the law. So anyway, back to you, Joe.
All right. Well, let's go around one more time and get final thoughts and comments from the whole group. Let's start. Joseph, it looks like you're back with us. Oh, wait a minute. He's eating lunch. Let me move on. Hey, I understand. You went through your lunchtime. Let's go to Tim Fagan real quick here. Tim, any final thoughts or final, you know what? One topic I haven't hit on is the code for how homes are built in general to withstand these types of issues. I'm curious, have any of you run across homes that didn't get the damage you would have expected, and those other homes around them or in other communities around them had damage? And what do you know as far as, were they built differently? Was there some kind of you know, method that was used or controls that were put in place that helped some of these homes withstand these issues when others didn't? Because I don't see insurance companies continuing to pay these year after year after year like this. It's just somebody's going to have to do something. But let's start with you, Darren.
You know, it's a really good point, Joe, because when you look at Florida, for example, you know, a lot of snowbirds move here for a reason or come down for 6 months out of the year because of the climate in the off season. When we talk about hurricanes, you know, it's not warm or excessively hot and humid, but we're seeing that impact. I think Hurricane Michael really put codes on the map when it comes to how houses are built. Because you got a lot of homes here that are built back, you know, to the 50s, 60s, 70s, that weren't, you didn't necessarily have the type of hurricanes that you're seeing today. And they weren't nearly as frequent either. And so now these houses that, you know, are built, or they're built during those times, can't withstand Category 5 hurricanes or Category 4 hurricanes, or the storm surges that are coming with it. I mean, and these hurricanes are rapidly intensifying, and there's more growth. There's more homes than there has ever been before. and they're building on the beaches. Why? It's one of the most beautiful places to live. But when you look at storm surges that are coming through at 18, 20 feet, water, the power of water is just immense. And it's, as we've seen in local media news coverage, houses literally taken off their foundations and they're sitting on on top of other houses or down the block or disintegrated. But now you're looking at houses that are being rebuilt after Michael, after Ian, that are built to new codes that are designed to withstand that type of, not necessarily the power of water. When you get that much water, it's going to hit, it's going to have an impact on the building. But there's been a couple of stories that I've seen on the west coast of Florida where the houses were built to stand up to a Category 5 hurricane, and they're still living in them. They didn't sustain much damage.
And they didn't even vacate. They didn't even leave during the storm in many of these cases.
Exactly. So the codes are, you build according to where you see failure, and because of Florida and what they're seeing, and Texas, another good area, and Louisiana, these areas that are in the Gulf and along the Atlantic coast, they are recognizing that these storms are becoming more frequent. And you're right. That's one of the biggest problems in Florida right now is insurance. The carriers have been pulling out left and right. And the reason why is because of, the ratio loss that you have is just exceeding what, they're bringing in as far as financial income is concerned. They eventually say enough's enough. So something's got to change. And essentially building codes are the start. It's not the end, but it is the start, because you build a more sustainable home that can withstand water, that can withstand wind, then you've got something that's going to be able to that's got longevity to it and not going to blow over the next time the next hurricane rolls through. And listen, they're talking about another one forming within the next week or two down in the Caribbean. We'll see what that transpires to. And they're talking about it hitting towards Florida again. So something has to change, and it starts with codes. And you can see the buildings that are now being focused on building for hurricanes. They're standing up, and essentially you'll see more and more of that occur as they rebuild in these areas that have been devastated, where the homes just don't exist anymore.
Yeah, I can't see how insurance is going to be able to continue. Now we're talking about in the chat, there's discussion now to add an additional category of hurricane. So we might have, sixes. It's going to be tough. And of course, we already have problems with the cost of housing to start with. When we start to make code even more difficult, the prices go up. And will people be able to afford to live in these areas? Yep. Tim, your thoughts?
Well, as far as codes go, we were talking about state codes, but obviously in Florida, there's plenty of county codes and local municipality codes that we have to be aware of as well when we're working in those certain areas. So I know that some of the counties require you, if you're coming from out of county, require you to register your company with them. You pay a little registration fee, and you need to do that. And they have inspectors that are going around making sure that these out of town contractors are all registered. But on the code side, that's the part I have. But if not, Darren hit it directly on the head as far as, making sure that you build for these kind of events, depending on the local area that you live in. And, that the codes certainly help with that.
Joseph, I'm wondering if you saw any, you were up more in the North Carolina area, and you guys do a lot more residential, it seems, than some of the others on the call. Did you see any homes that withstood this very well versus one, down the street that didn't make it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there were some homes, and remember, the North Carolina, particularly northwestern North Carolina, the building codes are years and decades old. So there's no new construction. It's all stone houses and, we'll stay away from the floods. The newer construction homes actually fared better, just from conventional construction. I can't say, Joe, that there was any sort of mandate about, okay, we're going to build houses that will withstand, floods or rain or wind. Just generally speaking, the newer construction fared better than the older.
And I think it's a good point to note that one of our audience members pointed out that we have to all remember that building codes represent the minimal building standard. You can always build better than that, but they are the minimum. And
to that point, though, Joe, it's an interest, because I like the comment that he said, minimum standards. Well, back when the houses in Florida were built in the 1960s, et cetera, there was a minimum standard, and they're not withstanding today's hurricanes. So you're seeing that standard. It is in fact coming up as far as how they build the homes. Is it a be all to end all? No. And some cases it's due diligence as far as the homeowner is concerned. Know what you're buying, and the area that you're moving into. And people are flocking to Florida like crazy because we didn't have a lot of hurricanes for a period of time. Now they're coming back and they're leaving in droves. 500,000 people apparently have left Florida within the last year or two because of the hurricanes, et cetera.
Well, and because of the cost of insurance and the
it's everything. Yep, absolutely.
Well,
that's a whole other topic, the cost of insurance.
They've all moved to Texas, and y'all can have them back.
Pete, I want to start with the
Joe. I got some closing comments. Why don't you let Paul have his final comments on
please do, Paul.
Yeah, so the building codes that I've seen that work better down here in Florida, obviously the stick builds don't hold up as well. The new codes, a lot of them are cinder block. They're holding them much better. There's also a lot of new roofing material out there that's holding up better. There's composites. There's a company called Brava Tile that has a 188 mile per hour uplift and a 212 mile per hour uplift, and it's a composite. You're seeing a lot of that stuff. You're seeing metal last longer. The problem with tile is they hold better, but the problem with tile is debris flying around and breaking the tiles. And then tile roofs are very expensive, and the insurance companies, do not like to pay for tile roofs. Being an IA, I see it firsthand, and being a roofer, I see it firsthand. I used to be able to get tile roofs approved all day, every day from 2004, 2005, Wilma, and the 4 hurricanes back then. It wasn't a problem. You get to Irma, now they want to send engineers out because they don't want to pay for them. And so my recommendation in Florida is obviously either some type of composite, metal roofing, those type of things for residential homes. And obviously, your commercial, a lot of TPO and some, just depends on the area you live in too. If you're by water, you've got to be careful with metal. You got to make sure you have the correct metal or it'll rust on you. So, but yeah, the building codes, again, I'll touch base on that real quick, is I've seen with the new codes, things lasting better. If you go to, say, Michigan, they put a shingle roof on, it's 4 nails on a shingle. Down here in Florida, you're putting 6 nails on a shingle. So just stuff like that. But
well, they also have hurricane straps, which you'll never see. I'm in Pennsylvania. They don't even know what a hurricane strap is here. I mean,
exactly.
And there's no licensing for roofing contractors. Now you have to have a contractor's license in general, but anybody can be a roofer pretty much. It's quite the Wild West. Now we don't get hit with hurricanes very often, and in fact, basically never. But we do get a few tornadoes here and there, and it's very interesting how codes affect different parts of the country differently. And the other thing is, like, some parts of the country don't adopt the most recent code. They're still living with codes from 20 years ago or 15 years ago. Pete, let me turn it back to you. You wanted to add some final comments? And
well, you actually mentioned the T word, tornadoes. Nobody's commented on that, but one of the downsides or the negative effects of any of these hurricanes is they do spawn tornadoes. And where I actually vacated after Milton was in West Palm Beach, and literally 10 minutes from me, a tornado hit. We didn't find this out till the next day, totally leveled the culverts, which broke my heart because I love culverts, but a bunch of buildings in the area. And then in Port St. Lucie, where a friend of mine lives, There were people that were killed in one. That made the national news, and he said it was a little further west towards the water, so he was safe. I noticed that after Irma, where I live, tornadoes actually hit in my little park here, and some of the units got totally wiped out, and others it was like nothing happened to them. So that's kind of a roll of the dice type of thing. So what I want to comment, I made a couple of notes here to kind of wrap up. For one thing, when you talk about minimum standards, that pretty much applies generally speaking. Every standard that is ever written is a minimum standard. It's like, you got to do this at the minimum. Now, some are more stringent than others, but it's still a minimum standard for that particular area. So, for instance, in the U.S., when there are federal regulations that come down, the federal government says this is a regulation, whether it would be with asbestos or regulated materials. What a state has to do is it either adopts that standard. If they want to change it, then they have to make it more stringent. And there are some states like California and others that tend to do that on a pretty regular basis. The other thing is, with a lot of these insurance companies that are moving out of particularly Florida and California, it isn't just specifically because we have a lot of hurricanes here or there's a lot of wildfires in California. There's a political component to this that has to do with the state regulators. And the state regulators put certain rules in that won't allow these insurance companies to raise their rates. And nobody really kind of knows whether they should legitimately raise their rates or not raise it. Like I said, it becomes a battle that happens in these state houses. This, at least, is the party line that many of the insurance companies are saying. There's usually a little bit of truth to all sides. And then there's the part, well, what aren't you telling us? What's the small print that we can't see? It's unfortunate because the people that suffer most, has been brought up by many of the panels, has to do this humanitarian side, that people either can't get the coverages. The coverages are very expensive. In Florida, we have what's called Citizens. It's the largest insurer in the state of Florida, and it's kind of like the assigned risk pool. When you can't get insurance with the major carriers, then you go into Citizens. And collecting from Citizens sometimes could be difficult, like trying to collect from FEMA and the National Flood Programs. But that's what we have down here. The other thing about the local codes, and Timmy brought this up, I remember years ago talking to our friend Sam Bergman. And Sam is one of the guys that he's got all the licenses for his company. And last I had heard, it was 38 or 39 or 40 states. And all of the major companies who operate in multiple states usually have one or two individuals that will get these licenses on behalf of the corporation. And in particular, I always thought for the 20 years I live in California that their state regulations were pretty tough in contracting. He said in Florida, it's one of the toughest because besides, and maybe it's a money grab, Timmy, like I brought up, but besides the state licensing, there are county licensings and then even local jurisdictions in a particular city. And if you go into these areas to do work and you don't know what they are, you're going to get fined, you're going to get tagged. You may not be in an orange jumpsuit, but it's going to be problematic. That's why if you go into an area and you don't have an office and you're not in that state, it's good to partner with someone that already is there. And then they kind of know the rules and they can help you through it. And that's a big advantage of belonging to national companies. Darren commented on this and others that, you use the corporate headquarters or the local companies to kind of like as an area where the other people that come in, they can operate out of there. They can offer support and things of that nature. So those are some things that I think are pretty important. And that kind of brings us to, one of the reasons that things are so expensive with these codes, like in California. I remember asking Joe Stiebrick several years ago, I said, Joe, well, why are houses so expensive in California? He said, well, for one thing, you can start with the fact that there's about anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 in every house that's built of hardware that you'll never see inside walls to meet with the earthquake codes. And that was just a little thing.
Yep.
So in the different parts where you either have tornadoes, earthquakes, the hurricanes, there are different codes that have to be included for those particular areas. That adds into the cost and the sellability of a home. So the one thing that I'd like to close with, and I'm hoping that the next time, Joe, we will see it in the upcoming events on the IAQ Radio, is the Andy Ash Building Science Symposium that will be back in Naples, Florida on the week of the President's Day week. It's going to be the 18th and 19th, which is a Tuesday, Wednesday. It's already out there in the wires by some of the industry media, and there'll be more information available. And I know Darren will definitely be there. Well, quite a few people in the school will probably be there, but it's Stevebrook and John Stroud for 2 days dealing with all the local builders down here along the I-75 are the main supporters, and architects and people like that. And they're going to be talking about a lot of these issues that we deal with here from an engineering and a building science standpoint, sustainability, and a number of these things. And spending 2 days with Straub and Stevebrook, it doesn't get much better than that if you're a building science nerd, which a lot of us are, happen to be the loyal listeners of the IAQ radio. So anyway, I want to personally, I'm sorry I texted with Ken. He's got to be out of range because he couldn't even text back. So he must have totally lost his signal. So I'm sorry that we couldn't hear from him. Maybe we may have a follow-up show with Ken, because Ken's been boots on the ground all over the state in Georgia. I don't know if he's been in North Carolina, but certainly Florida and Georgia. He always has a very unique perspective. But I appreciate Darren and Paul and Timmy and Joseph. Appreciate you guys calling in, and of course all the loyal listeners. And I will put together a blog from notes and the things that you all said and send it out for you all to review before we upload it next week. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Joe.
All right, this is Radio Joe saying thanks to Darren Hudema, Joseph Morphis, Paul Clark, and Tim Fagan. Guys, that was a great show. And Ken Siders, thanks for trying to get in with us on ETA. We will talk to you in a not too distant future. We also want to thank Grayson, Gone Fishing Fisher at the controls, my co-host, the Z-Man, Cliff Slotnick. He'll be back next week. Pete Consigli, of course, the restoration industry's global watchdog. Please come back and join us next Friday at noon for the next episode of IAQ Radio Plus.
For IAQ Radio, I'm Spike Reel saying thanks for listening.